The music stopped. In the center of the ballroom, hundreds of eyes turned to the grand entrance. She stood there, 6 months pregnant, glowing under the chandelier light. But it wasn't just her arrival that shattered the air. It was the man by her side. A legend. A ghost. The last person anyone expected to see again. And David Walker dropped his glass before she even spoke a word. It was supposed to be his night, the Future Makers Gala, an annual celebration of innovation, power, and wealth. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed, and David Walker, tech billionaire and self-made mogul, stood proudly in the spotlight. On his arm, Sophie Grant, young, stunning, dangerous. She wasn't just his date. She was his declaration of freedom, of power, of control. He thought he'd buried the past, that his wife Emily would stay home, quiet and forgotten, that his betrayal would go unnoticed behind charity speeches and tailored suits. But when Emily entered the ballroom, pregnant, radiant and unshaken, everything cracked, and beside her stood Henry Carter, the very man who once built David's empire from the shadows, and vanished without a trace. What followed wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning. This is the story of how David Walker tried to own the world and came face to face with the one thing he couldn't control. David Walker didn't come from money. He came from a rented apartment behind a laundromat, raised by a single mother who scrubbed offices at night and smiled through exhaustion. By 16, he was coding in libraries while classmates played video games. By 28, he had sold his second startup for 8 figures. At 35, he was on the cover of Fortune, hailed as the future of AI commerce. They called him relentless, brilliant, visionary, and they weren't wrong. But behind the magazine covers and TED Talks, David had changed. The boy who once counted his mother's quarters to buy school lunch had grown obsessed with status, with control, with winning at any cost. Emily met him before all that. Back when he still cooked dinner, laughed without checking his phone, and believed in building something real. They married young. She supported him through the chaos of funding rounds and 20-hour workdays. And for a while, it worked. But success came with a price. Late nights became normal, messages unread, promises broken. David started vanishing into boardrooms and parties she wasn't invited to. When Emily found out she was pregnant, she thought it might bring them closer again. She was wrong. David barely reacted. A distracted kiss on the forehead. We'll talk later. Later never came. Instead came Sophie. She showed up at a tech summit in Berlin. Tall, sharp, confident. David noticed how the room bent toward her, how she spoke Wall Street fluently and smiled like she'd already won. At first, it was just meetings, then dinners, then silence at home. Emily waited, then she asked. Then she stopped asking. And that night, as David adjusted his cufflinks and straightened his tuxedo, he didn't tell Emily he'd be taking another woman to the Future Makers Gala. He just left. She watched the door close. Alone. 6 months pregnant. No explanation. No apology. Just a notification on social media. David Walker to headline Future Makers Gala. Special guest Sophie Grant. That was when something inside her snapped. And without realizing, that was when everything began to fall apart. Emily had never wanted the spotlight. She was the kind of woman who wrote thank you notes by hand and remembered the names of every assistant in David's office. Her dream was simple. Build a home filled with warmth, raise a child with love, and share a life with the man she believed in. She didn't care about private jets or Forbes lists. She cared about Sunday mornings in pajamas, laughing over burnt pancakes. When she found out she was pregnant, it felt like a promise, a reset, a way back. She imagined telling David during one of their rare dinners. Maybe he'd take her hand, smile that boyish smile she hadn't seen in months, and whisper, "We've waited long enough." Instead, he stared at his phone. "Wow," he muttered. "Okay, that's great." No hug, no emotion. Just a text to his assistant seconds later. She told herself he was overwhelmed, busy, pressured, but the truth clawed at her. The man she loved was slipping away, and someone else was replacing her in his world. It began in whispers. Photos of David at events she wasn't invited to. Laughter in the background of late-night calls. New perfume on his suits. Then Sophie appeared in headlines. Tech power couple. David Walker and the rising star of venture capital. Emily watched the articles pile up. She still slept in their bed. Still made space in the closet he no longer used. The night before the gala, she sat in the nursery they'd barely discussed. The walls were still bare. No crib, no plans. She rested her hands on her belly, whispering to a child who hadn't even arrived yet. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know what to do." Part of her wanted to stay home and pretend none of it was happening. Let David have his night. Let him play pretend in his kingdom of glass and lies. But then her phone lit up. It was a message from someone she hadn't heard from in years. "Henry Carter, we need to talk. I know what he's doing, and I'm not letting him get away with it." Emily stared at the message, heart pounding. Henry had been David's mentor, the man who once believed in him when no one else would. Why was he reaching out to her now? She didn't know. But in that moment, something shifted. Not anger, not revenge, something deeper. She stood up, and for the first time in months she didn't feel small. The house was quiet, not the comforting kind of quiet, but the kind that rang in her ears like a warning. Emily stood in the nursery, still untouched. Empty walls, a single lamp casting a soft glow. It was the night of the gala. She could almost hear the orchestra warming up at the downtown venue. Imagine the clinking glasses, the flash of cameras, the perfectly rehearsed smiles. And David, standing tall with Sophie on his arm, pretending nothing was broken. She walked to the window and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. She had spent years helping David build that empire. She was there when he cried over rejections, when their bank account barely covered rent, and now she was invisible. Her hand instinctively found her belly. The baby moved, a flutter, like a whisper from within. "I'm still here," Emily said softly. "I still matter." But the voice in her head, the one fed by months of silence, of gaslighting, of loneliness, was louder. "You weren't enough. You weren't exciting. You're just the wife he left behind." She sat on the nursery floor, her back against the wall, and let the tears come. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow, steady grief, the kind that comes when the dream dies quietly. Her phone buzzed again. "Henry Carter, if you don't want to go alone, I'll take you. You deserve to be seen." She hadn't seen Henry in over 4 years. Once he was almost family, a silent partner in David's rise, respected, brilliant, terrifyingly calm. He had vanished after a scandal no one ever understood, retreating from public life, and now he was offering her his presence, his name, his protection. Emily didn't respond at first. What would be the point? David had already chosen. The world had already moved on. She stood up, went to her bathroom and caught her reflection. Pale, tired, but not broken. For months, she'd let herself disappear. Tonight, she would reclaim space. She opened her closet and pulled out the dress she had bought months ago for a different occasion. A deep navy gown, fitted at the waist, flowing softly over her belly. It made her feel powerful. A knock at the front door. She walked to it slowly, unsure of what she'd find. Henry stood there in a tailored suit, calm and composed. No flash, no arrogance, just presence. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I'm not here to force anything." Emily looked at him, tears threatening again. "But if I don't go, I'll regret it." He nodded once. "Then let's go." The ride downtown was quiet, not uncomfortable, just waited. Henry didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. When they arrived, photographers immediately turned their attention to the unfamiliar car, pulling up to the velvet-lined entrance. And when Emily stepped out, elegant, pregnant, composed, silence fell across the crowd. But then Henry stepped out behind her. The murmurs turned into chaos. Cameras snapped, voices rose. "Is that Henry Carter? Why is she with him? Where's David?" Emily didn't flinch. She took Henry's arm and walked forward, every step a reclamation. Somewhere inside, David was laughing, toasting, flaunting, but that was about to end. And you? Have you ever stood in silence, watching someone erase you like you never mattered? Tell me in the comments. Sometimes your story might be the one that helps someone else keep standing. Because no matter how invisible the world makes you feel, you are still here, and you still matter. The moment she stepped into the ballroom, the world slowed down. Hundreds of faces turned, forks froze mid-air, conversations cut off mid-sentence. Emily didn't look at them. She didn't need their approval. She kept her eyes forward, her back straight, her hand resting gently on her belly. Henry walked beside her, not as a shield, not as a savior, but as a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. She didn't need to explain herself. She just needed to show up. And for the first time in a long time, she felt her feet grounded on the marble floor beneath her, not just passing through, not fading in someone else's shadow, but present, steady, seen. The music resumed softly. People whispered, cameras flashed. In the distance, she caught sight of David. He froze mid-conversation, glass halfway to his lips, eyes wide, expression unreadable. Sophie leaned in to say something, but David wasn't listening. Emily inhaled deeply, not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't about embarrassing him. This wasn't about revenge. This was about her voice, her dignity, her truth. She had spent months trying to shrink herself to fit a version of marriage that no longer existed, trying to be understanding, patient, silent. But silence had never protected her. It had only erased her. And now, standing under chandeliers that once made her feel small, she felt something unexpected. Power. Not the kind that comes from wealth or influence, the kind that comes from knowing who you are, even when the world forgets. She leaned toward Henry and whispered, "I'm okay." He nodded, without asking for proof. And as they continued walking, Emily felt something loosen in her chest. A pain she didn't know she was carrying. A weight she had mistaken for love. It didn't vanish all at once, but for the first time in months, she wanted to breathe again. David couldn't move. From across the room, he watched his pregnant wife walk in on the arm of the one man he never expected to see again. Henry Carter, the ghost of his past, the architect of his success. Sophie followed his gaze, confused. "Who is that?" David's voice was barely audible. "That's Henry." Her brow furrowed. "The Henry Carter?" He nodded once, eyes locked on Emily. They were halfway across the ballroom when Mark Tolland, a venture capitalist and longtime friend of David's, leaned in. "You knew she'd be here?" David didn't answer. Because no, he didn't know. He never imagined. Emily reached the heart of the room. Conversations stopped around her like ripples in water. She met no one's gaze. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. David finally moved. He excused himself from the group, barely hearing Sophie calling after him, and crossed the floor like a man walking into his own trial. He stopped a few feet in front of Emily and Henry. Emily looked at him, not with hate, not with sorrow, just presence. "Emily," he said. "David." Henry stood silent beside her, impeccably dressed, composed, unreadable. David turned to him. "Why are you here?" Henry's answer was quiet, firm. "Because she deserves to be seen." A silence spread between the three of them, thick as smoke, the kind that didn't need words to scream. Emily tilted her head slightly. "You brought Sophie tonight." David straightened his jacket. "It was a mistake." Emily nodded. "Yes, but not the only one." For a second, she thought she saw something crack in him, behind the perfect suit and rehearsed charm. A flicker of something human, then it vanished. Backstage, David leaned against the marble wall in the hallway, hands shaking. What just happened? He thought he had control of the room, the narrative, the future, but seeing Emily like that, poised, unbothered, untouchable, unraveled something he didn't know was still inside him. Regret, fear, guilt. He wasn't sure. Meanwhile, Emily was seated at a quiet table near the back, sipping water. Henry beside her, scanning the room like a chessboard. "I didn't expect him to fall apart that quickly." she whispered. Henry gave her a look. You underestimated your impact. She looked away. I wasn't trying to make a scene. No, Henry said. You were trying to stand. But beneath her calm exterior, Emily's heart was racing. Was she strong enough for what came next? Could she hold her ground when the apologies came? Would they come? She didn't want him back, but she did want him to see, to really see. And part of her feared he wouldn't. David found her alone in the gallery wing, far from the ballroom noise. The soft lighting fell across Emily's face as she stood in front of a painting, abstract, dark, chaotic. Her arms were crossed gently over her stomach, as if protecting more than just herself. He cleared his throat. She didn't turn around. I didn't expect you to come, he said. I know. A pause. David stepped closer, but not too close. I shouldn't have brought Sophie. Emily gave a small laugh, sharp and hollow. You didn't just bring her, David. You brought her into everything. Your image, your life, your narrative. You erased me like I was just a footnote. He swallowed hard. I was lost. No, she said, turning to face him now. Her voice steady, her eyes clear. You were never lost. You just stopped looking at me. Silence. David rubbed his hands together, nervous, exposed. I messed up, I know that. But I didn't expect to see you like this tonight. Like what? Strong, he said. Untouchable. She tilted her head. I was always strong, David. You just weren't looking. That hit him. He lowered his gaze. For a moment he looked small. She reached into her clutch and handed him an envelope. What's this? Divorce papers. Already reviewed. Nothing dramatic. I'm not here to destroy you. He opened it, scanned the first page, then stopped. You're not asking for much. I don't need much. Just peace. David nodded slowly, then whispered, Do you hate me? No, Emily said softly. I pity you. His eyes glistened just for a second. She continued, You built this empire, this persona, but somewhere along the way, you lost the man who used to bring me coffee at midnight and laugh at my bad jokes. He let out a breath. You know Henry came to me last week, she added. He said he saw you in a meeting, treating people like pawns. Said you were becoming the kind of man he never wanted to invest in. David's jaw clenched. And now he's investing in you. She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because this wasn't about who she was with. It was about who she had become. And David knew this wasn't a temporary break. This was the closing of a chapter. I'm sorry, Emily, he said, the words trembling out of him. I know, she replied. Then, after a pause, I hope you figure out how to like yourself again. For your sake. And for his. Her hand touched her belly one last time. Then she turned and walked away, leaving David in the gallery, surrounded by fractured colors and silence. The same silence he once weaponized, now echoing back at him. Months passed. The headlines faded, the noise settled. The world moved on. But something in Emily had changed permanently. She wasn't just the woman David left behind. She was the woman who stood up, showed up, and walked out on her own terms. She gave birth to a baby boy, Noah, on a rainy Tuesday morning. Henry was there, not holding her hand, not making grand declarations, just present, quiet, steady. David came to visit a week later. He held his son like he was holding something sacred, and for the first time, Emily saw a different kind of softness in him. One not rooted in charm, but in humility. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. Some things couldn't be fixed, but some things, like showing up for your child, could still be chosen. Emily rebuilt her life, not with drama or revenge, but with intention. She started working with women going through high-risk pregnancies and emotional abandonment. She turned her pain into something useful. And in that process, she found something unexpected. Herself, the version of her that never needed a man to validate her. That knew her worth, even when the world forgot it. Because sometimes, what breaks you isn't betrayal. It's forgetting who you are while trying to be what someone else wants. And the most powerful thing you can ever reclaim is your voice. Maybe you've been there too, standing in the ruins of something that once felt unshakable, wondering if it was your fault, wondering if starting over is even possible. But listen closely, you are not the pieces someone else left behind. You are the one who gets to choose what happens next. If this story moved you, leave a like. And if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to erase you, share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear your words tonight. And if you believe in healing, in second chances, and in stories that matter, subscribe. There are so many more journeys to tell, and one of them might be yours.